Welcome to a social reading of Chapter 3 of Crucial Conversations, the third edition by Grenny et al. Chapter 3, we're done with the preface and we are into the how-to. This chapter goes straight into tools, no less than 4 tools: unbundling, bookmarking, a CPR technique, and I will argue reframing. The chapter presents it as topic selection, but I'm going to argue that it's more akin to reframing. Excellent quote from Charles Kettering: "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." The moment you open your mouth, you've already made a decision. Really important concept here, your classic think before you speak. Actionable tip straight away: crucial conversations are most successful when they focus on one issue. We know that multitasking leads to inefficiency, so you might think, okay, my one-on-one with my manager, let me have one topic per one-on-one. That doesn't follow. You can possibly squeeze multiple crucial conversations into a single one-on-one, but do be mindful that you're not rushing topics either. So my tip from me is make a conversational backlog. And that way you can always go back to it. Hey, I need to have this conversation with this person, but you're allowing for that breathing room to let topics settle. Leveraging an agenda and pre-reading notes, sharing that with whoever you're having a meeting with. These are going to help keep those conversations focused. Throughout this chapter, we'll be referring to the case of Wendy and Sandrine at a global tech company. So this is going to apply to tech. And classic example here of a tension situation where Sandrine wants to talk timelines. Wendy is an engineer. Wendy engineers it'll take over 6 months, and the manager is like, hey, we already committed. That whole classic problem. Personally, I would happily escalate this to my skip level. I love that this is a realistic example, but let's bear with this example problem and say, what if I don't escalate it to a skip? What if I want to hash this conversation out? Really great that you could frame the objection in different ways. If you're the engineer and you're like, hey dude, you can't go committing for me, but there's different ways to frame the issue. The chapter will be calling that choosing your topic. I'm going to say that that's a matter of framing because you're basically dealing with the same issue. But this is really important, right? How you bring this up to the manager is incredibly important. And in some of these cases, she's setting me up to fail is just an exclamation. You can see how asking a question, just one bare minimum technique, lead with a question into a conversation instead of just shouting something. That's a bare minimum technique, but there are even better ways to frame. The authors are going to go through poor ways to frame, and they're going to say, don't have an easy over a hard conversation. I think this is a bad mental model. I think often going for an easy conversation, a conversation that feels easy to you, may feel easy to the other person, and having a comfortable conversation is actually a great technique. So I don't think choosing the easy or the hard conversation is the right criteria. I don't think recent versus right is a good contrast. Often when we talk about schedule, when we talk about tension issues, the current issue is the one we should be prioritizing. So it's true that humans have recency bias and we want to own and mitigate that bias, but it's also true that you don't want to be dragging up old conversations when there's something urgent and current. So I don't think either of these are good mental models, actually. But I do love this section, signs that you're having the wrong conversation. Or in other words, signs that you've framed the conversation poorly is if your own emotions are escalating. Obviously, as well as triggering emotions in other participants. We don't want to do that either. You walk away skeptical. I like this one. It is a marker of a well-done conversation when parties are confidently agreed at the end of it. Even if you disagree during the meeting, that's totally fine. You can disagree and you can come to an agreement by the end of it. That's a really green flag. And the deja vu thing. Yeah, speaking of bringing up old conversations, if you feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over, you're probably framing the conversation poorly, and there's probably a way that you can rephrase, like maybe just choosing different word selection can help here. Or bringing in different parties. There's a number of techniques, but anyway, this is a great marker that the conversation has gone poorly, is if you keep having the same conversation over and over. So here's a technique they recommend I love, is unbundling with the CPR acronym. So CPR stands for content, pattern, and relationship. And so the idea is that if a thing happens, that's content. And if a thing happens multiple times, it is a pattern. And you can have a conversation about a pattern differently. If patterns continue and they haven't been addressed, this impacts the relationship. It brings up deeper concerns about trust, competence, and respect. And I think this is a really great approach for how you can escalate the importance of a conversation. If the other person is not getting it, maybe they acknowledge the pattern. Maybe they're like, yeah, this thing happens over and over. What's the big deal? You can say, I feel this is impacting, I don't think I would say this is impacting your competence. But you could say that it's impacting your confidence. Maybe there's a technical issue that happens over and over and it makes you nervous to ship and release code. This is creating a working relationship problem, right? A tip from me would be don't be accusatory here, own your feelings. So I would say, I am really anxious about this release. I wouldn't say, you're breaking my trust, bro. That might be true, but I think there are different ways to phrase it. Anyway, I think the mental model here is great, even if the wording in this relationship aspect needs to be extremely taken care of. And starting with content and keeping it at content will resolve most of your issues. Don't try to draw a grand relationship problem out of a one-off. So this is a really good mental model, a checklist. Start with just, hey, there's a problem here, and just bring it up. Anyway, I love this CPR. Now, if CPR doesn't work, there are other techniques. You can talk about process. Some people don't really resonate with the whole relationship thing. Like maybe they don't care. Like maybe you are writing tests on your team and the tests are irritating to some people. But then the tech lead is like, hey, tests are really important. I don't care if it annoys some people. Like we need to test. Okay, then you can shift the conversation to a process conversation. This is going to work great with things-oriented people. So there's like a personality consideration here. And you can have direct interpersonal tailoring. So consider that team lead, try to understand where they're coming from, try to understand their incentives, try to understand their mental model, and appeal to it directly is a great technique if the general pattern of CPR isn't helping. What do I really want? A really great focusing and clarifying question that can help with these conversations. When you go to have the process conversation with the tech lead, are you trying to assist someone else that you heard like is annoyed by the tests? Are you the one annoyed by the tests? And if so, why? What is it you're trying to get out of your conversation with the tech lead? Is it taking too much time? Are you wanting engineering time back? So maybe if you and the tech lead can work out an arrangement where, hey, you do the tests, but the developer experience is better or it takes less time, maybe you can get what you want and they can get what they want too. Really great way to approach a conversation. Once you know what you want, practice your elevator pitch, stating it as simply as possible. This is going to keep the conversation focused. It's just going to improve communication, and it's going to make the whole conversation less scary and less likely to trip over into unrelated conversations. Now we get into bookmarking. So when you have this conversation, be alert to when the topic changes. Maybe the other person's changing it because there's something important to them. Value that. Don't just pull the rug out from under them, but you can use a bookmark. Here's an example of bookmarking. Wow, that's a big deal. I really want to talk to you about this, but let's have a different meeting about that, basically. So value them and create a goal of talking about that separately and then refocus the issue. Again, this correlates with the conversation backlog idea. That's it for chapter 3. I really loved it. And you can see towards the end there, we were starting to develop tools for focusing a conversation once it kicks off. That's going to be the meat of chapter 4. So follow for that.